Now, perhaps these robes are purely symbolic and not literal, and that saints here have not yet received their glorified body. Yet, there must be some measure of tangibility to the glorified soul, as we witness in the remarkable story of the rich man and Lazarus in Luke 16, and the souls of the martyrs that we read about in Revelation 6, that were able to see and hear and speak and are at rest, the text tells us, and they even have concern and knowledge for things that are happening on the earth. But we read here that not only they clothed in white, but they also have palm branches in their hands. So this must be a magnificent celebration that is being depicted here, a picture of heavenly triumph. You see, the waving of palm branches was customary in those ancient days whenever there was an Oriental celebration. Dr. Robert Thomas has this to say about this particular matter, and I quote, "According to Oriental thought, a palm was a perfect tree because it embodied everything a tree should have. Palm branches were regarded as appropriate at any season of joy or triumph, such as the triumphal entry of Christ in John 12:13. They were prominent at the Feast of Tabernacles, being used to construct the shelters on the housetops required for that occasion," end quote. And as we will see, the full expression of the Feast of Tabernacles is now the experience of these dear saints as they bask in the glory of the presence of God as He, according to verse 15, spreads His tabernacle over them. Verse 10 goes on to say that they cry out with a loud voice, saying, "Salvation to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb." Having confessed their sin and endured the horrors of the persecution at the hands of evil men, they cry out in jubilation, celebrating their undeserved salvation. Salvation to our God, notice, who sits upon the throne. Being seated upon the throne symbolizes His sovereignty, His rule over all of creation. And they also say, and to the Lamb, the one who purchased their redemption with His very blood. So first we see saints before the throne, but secondly, angels around the throne. Angels who are now sharing the elation of the heavenly throng. In verse 11, we read, "And all the angels were standing around the throne and around the elders and the four living creatures." And you will recall, according to chapter 5 and verse 11, the number of these angels are myriads and myriads, a number that cannot be counted. And here the myriads of the angelic host join in the celebration, not because they have experienced saving grace, but because the triune God has dispensed saving grace and is therefore being glorified. These are the celestial creatures, you will recall, that rejoice over every repentant sinner, according to Luke 15:10. These are the ones who, according to 1 Peter 1:12, constantly look on the greatness of salvation with utter fascination, longing to understand it better. And now we see them encircling the elders and the four living beings and the tribulation saints before the throne and the glorified Christ. And then in verse 11, we see that they fall on their faces before the throne and worship God, saying, "Amen. Blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Amen." So here the angels magnify the tribute of the saints. And this leads us to the third element of this vision, and that is worship unto the throne. The angels begin by saying amen, which is a solemn affirmation of the holy and sovereign God before whom they have now prostrated themselves. Next, the angelic worship erupts into a sevenfold doxology of praise. First, we see the word blessing, eulogia in Greek. It literally means good speaking. But this is praise now to the one true God. And then secondly, the word glory, doxa, which means to give glory and honor. Here, to the one who has worked this incredible work of reconciling sinners unto himself. And then thirdly, wisdom, Sophia. The idea here of extolling the marvels of his plan of redemption that exceeds the limits of our imagination. And then fourthly, thanksgiving, Eucharistia. It depicts this idea of extreme gratitude for God's glorious grace and the victory of his love. And then the word honor from tamao, which means highest esteem. We talked about that earlier with our mothers, to have high esteem, to honor them. And here they acknowledge the divine accomplishment of his plan of redemption. And then sixthly, they use the word power, dynamis, extolling his omnipotent power that has conquered Satan, conquered sin, conquered death. And finally, might, ischus, the word strength. It could be translated strength. And here he exalts, or they exalt God because of his infinite strength to deliver this vast throng of martyrs from the kingdom of darkness and from the wrath of God that is being poured out upon the wicked. Then they conclude with yet another amen, affirming once again the merit of their tribute. And finally, the scene reveals something else, and I believe this is the most precious truth of this whole vision here. Here we see the glories of heaven and the sanctuary of the throne. Notice verse 13. And one of the elders answered, saying to me, "These who are clothed in the white robes, who are they, and from where have they come?" Now, friends, you must understand, the elder here is not seeking information as if he didn't know, but rather he is using a unique dialogue format to clearly explain this fascinating revelation. Verse 14, John says, "My Lord, you know," which is a respectful reply, confessing his ignorance as well as indicating his desire to have the correct answer, to alleviate his bewilderment here. "Lord, you know." And then the elder said to him, "These are the ones who come out of the great tribulation." Now, let me pause here. Literally in the Greek, this can be translated, "These are those who came out of the tribulation, comma, the great one." This is also described in chapter 11, verses 2 and 3, as a period that I should say is limited to 42 months. And it says 1,260 days. In fact, Jesus described this final 3.5 years in Matthew 24:21 as the great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever shall. Now, will you also please note the phrase here in verse 14, "the ones who come out." This is a very unique grammatical construction in Greek, and it denotes an extended, prolonged process of coming out. It's literally expressing the idea that this particular throng of martyrs will continue to see their ranks grow over the remaining days of the Great Tribulation in the final 3.5 years. And I might also add that this idea refutes the notion that this is referring to the rapture of the church, which according to 1 Corinthians 15:52 will happen in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye, not over a prolonged period of time. In verse 14, we also read that They are described as those who have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Here, the symbolism is explained by the cleansing effect of the blood of the Lamb, making therefore their robes emblematic of not only a victory celebration, as we read about in verse 9, but here emblematic of the imputed righteousness of Christ that has cleansed them from all of their sins. This idea of blood being a cleansing agent for sin may seem bizarre to many people, but it is clearly explained in the Old Testament.